everyone. Welcome to another Friday Floating. It's been a while since we've done one of these. So today I'm going to have Carmen of Periods with Carmen on to have a chat about kind of her research. She's a menstrual health researcher, but also to talk a little bit about her course and the memes on her Instagram account because they're hilarious. Perfect. She's just here. Fantastic. Let's get her on.
Let's see. Yeah.
Well, hello.
Hello. Good
How are you?
morning.
How are you doing? Yeah. How are you getting on?
Yeah, I'm fine. I've been better. I'm running
Oh
with a bit of a
no.
cold. Yeah, that isn't great, but
Oh
I'm
no.
getting better. So that's good.
Okay.
How are
Okay.
you?
I'm good. Yeah. All good. Have that Friday feeling, so it's happy out. Can you hear me? Okay, my connection's all right.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
fine.
Super.
Can hear fine. You can hear me fine as well?
Yeah. Yeah. I can hear you fine. Perfect. Sometimes the Wi-Fi goes a little bit funny here, so let's just double checking.
Yeah, can happen. Can happen.
Yeah. So super. Thanks so much for coming on and having a chat. Always.
Yeah.
Think it'll be really interesting because I kind of love the approach that you take to menstrual health. So we'll talk a little bit about kind of your research and all of that sort of stuff, and then also I just shared one of your memes. So do you love the kind of memes that are starting to trickle through and the kind of I guess the social undercurrent of that as well, and that
Yeah.
comes through on the Instagram account. So yeah, do you want to kind of give a little intro about yourself, your background,
Yeah.
what you do?
For sure. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. First of all, it's
Mhm.
really nice to finally chat because we've been following each other and kind of liking each other's stuff, but it's really nice
Yeah,
to connect.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So my name is Carmen. I've been in the menstrual health space for about 4 years now. Started with my kind of master's thesis a few years ago, and then I got completely fascinated in the world of menstrual health, women's health. At the moment, I'm doing my PhD research, so I work full time at university, and my
Super.
main interest is kind of understanding this social movement around menstruation. So what I'm really curious about is like, how are all the people that are working on menstrual health talking about menstrual health, advocating for menstrual health? Because I think we can all acknowledge, people who follow you probably notice already that yeah, it's hard to get periods in the scene, it's hard to get periods in bills, it's hard to get periods discussed. So that's
Mm.
kind of like my research. And then already like a year and a half ago, I was thinking like I really would love to share this more broadly on Instagram as well. I felt like I resisted this for a long time because I was a bit shy around it. I was like, nah, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I guess I just have to go for it. And so yeah, so I started, like, I opened the profile, and I kind of try to bring in this humor lens a bit with the memes as well, right?
Yeah.
And also a bit of kind of like using the menstrual cycle as this way to fight perfectionism and to fight harmful standards towards women, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. No, it's something that I've noticed myself as well, where, obviously as a woman, but just, like in general, you kind of care about these things. But once you start working in whether it's the menstrual cycle space or if it's in the kind of, I guess, more like the pre and postnatal space, of which I work in both, you're literally just like,
Yeah.
whoa. Wait a second. And it just kind of adds another layer to kind of, I guess, what you're already maybe aware of or like not aware of. That kind of goes on in societies, or you said the kind of the standards that are there.
Hmm. Hmm.
So yeah, it's definitely a further, it's almost like an extra layer is peeled back once you kind of start finding out about the space and kind of the standards that we kind of live up to and how we work and all this kind of stuff, and how it's not necessarily set up with us in
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's also for me the craziest thing about it, bringing in this kind of reach lens, and then also getting more knowledgeable about my own body, so developing my own body
Mm,
literacy, was that I started kind of really putting all the facts together, and I was like, actually, this lack of knowledge, this lack of kind of body sovereignty is harming us in all different ways, from the
mm,
way we exercise and with the way we're told to eat to the way we are socialized about our bodies. I mean, it's so deep. It's not just about periods and being able to
yeah,
talk about periods openly, which is great and important. But it's also about yeah, kind of getting equal rights and equal, yeah, kind of access to that vital information, really.
Yeah. And I think, it is something that kind of comes up a lot in these chats that I have with people, and you can kind of see it coming out a lot as well with kind of the accounts that look at menstrual cycle tracking as, say, fertility awareness, or whether, that's as a kind of form of contraception or as a way to try and kind of conceive. And really, this is kind of this whole thing about kind of informed consent. And again, it comes up in the pregnancy space as well when you're kind of, during labor and stuff.
Hmm.
And I think that's something, seems to be changing, but definitely with the forms of contraceptions. And again, I'm a big advocate of being like, I guess pro-choice is the word, but just being like, there's no right contraception, or there's no right way of doing anything. It's all about kind of understanding it and then making the choice for you. But I think for a long time, I know my experience and a lot of people in my circles didn't get the full picture, or we
Yeah.
just kind of accept that, yeah, okay, the pill comes with this big list of side effects, and this comes with this big side effects, and they're over there developing male contraceptives that have like two or three side effects, and they're like, no, 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 we can't put that into production because there's too many side effects. And you're like, but what about
Yeah,
all these? And
yeah,
I'm not
yeah,
saying,
yeah.
any drugs, ideally you're trying to look for one that doesn't have any side effects, but I think there, as you said, that lack of knowledge is really prevalent,
Hmm.
or lack of understanding just about how our bodies work in general, and actually what should we be doing with them, and how do we support them best, whether that's food, nutrition, cycle tracking, whatever that might be. So yeah, so your research in particular, kind of what area was that looking at?
Yeah, so initially I started really looking at female entrepreneurs who kind of come up or like found their venture with the aim of kind of improving menstrual health in the region of work. So, like from menstrual cup founders to period underwear. And I think what was interesting for me there is that the menstrual product is used as an object to kind of also
Mm,
pass on some values and some information, right? It's not just you're selling a cup, you're selling a way to reframe periods, which was what I was really interested in. And I've definitely found for myself that the switching to different menstrual products has
mm,
definitely changed the way I perceive my body, right? And because you start, first of all, you own menstrual products and
mm.
they stay with you for a couple of years, which I think makes a hell of a difference in the sense that you are not throwing them. Um,
Hi guys, I don't know if that was me or if it was really Carmen that froze. So hopefully we'll get her back on, and hopefully you can all hear me. Give me a thumbs up if anyone is here and they can hear me, if that was me. Um, that froze, or if it was Maria Carmen. I'm not sure what happened.
there we go.
Hi, I'm not sure what happened. I don't know if that was me that froze or you. I was like, my Wi-Fi.
I don't know. I tried to change Wi-Fi, so hopefully this
Okay,
works
okay.
better. Sorry about that. It was
No, you're fine. I am always like, oh my God, is it me? Because it happened once before where mine totally crashed, and
yeah,
thankfully it was at the end, and then the person I was interviewing just kind of kept on chatting, and I was like, fab, great, that worked so well. But anyway, we have you back, which is great.
Yeah, nice, nice. Yeah, so I was just saying, kind of, I'm interested in the way in which these entrepreneurs use the products as well,
Yeah.
because it's so important. We sometimes we don't even think about it, but how disposable products or products that are not made for us, really with us in mind, can really give us a different message about ourselves and our body. So that was kind of
Mm.
what I started with, and now I'm really focused as well on how all these different actors that work in the menstrual space are trying to kind of make menstruation relevant, and how do they do it, and how do they advocate for it to be integrated in bills and things like that. So that's kind of more the systemic level that I'm shifting
Yeah.
towards, basically.
Brilliant. That's so cool. And you had a chapter in a book published as well. So that was looking at that social entrepreneurship side of things within the context of the women's health.
Yeah, exactly. So in the Handbook of Critical Menstruation Studies, yeah, so that piece is really also focused on kind of reflecting on the way in which businesses can play a role, and also be a bit critical of like to what extent can they play a role? Is it really their job? Is it only their job? I think we see this in the space of Instagram as well, when we talk about menstrual cycle awareness, when we talk about fertility awareness. There's, of
Mm.
course, a lot of consumerism as well, right? Because we're
Yeah.
selling thermometers, we're selling courses, so I think it's an interesting intersection between can purchase and selling be the fix, and does it have to be regulated? To what extent do we have to have our own personal journeys, right, in the discovery of kind of menstrual cycle awareness? How can that be supported or harmed by yeah, by capitalism in a way? But I'm not that skeptical. I do think that since we already consume so much, about our bodies,
Mm.
I think it's important that we can choose, and that we are able to choose brands and people, and that have the right values behind them, that have the right kind of information as well, in their products too.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember seeing on your account that you put up a really interesting post, and I think I thought it was really interesting about kind of, now, if I misquote you, correct me, but it was my takeaway from it was pretty much around the shame that maybe, or the pressure that may be placed on women who can't afford to buy sustainable
Hmm.
period products. And I thought that was so interesting. And again, there's a kind of a woman over here, Claire Hunt, who kind of runs the homeless period charity, and there's kind of various ones across Europe or different kind of variations of it, but basically trying to make sanitary products, or I say sanitary products, period products, accessible to people who are, say, who are asylum seekers or who are homeless, and in kind of care centres and stuff like this. And because it is an expense, and obviously I think it's one of those things where, and again, this is my opinion, for the people who can happily afford to use the more sustainable products, fantastic, go for it. And then for those who can't, just doing what you can, and then through the communication, hopefully over time, the pressure will be on those companies that will make affordable, sustainable products for people to use. Because it is hard to be like, I'm just going to drop whatever it is, 30 quid or 50 quid on a pair of period underwear,
Yeah,
so
definitely. So, and then there's the economical aspect of it, and there's also the
mm,
comfort that people have, the different kind of comfort that people have with their own internal body. And I mean, we can of course wish that everyone feels really fine with inserting a product in their vagina, but I mean, there's people who have had traumatic experiences, and we cannot
of
just
course.
expect everyone to make certain choices, because then again we are kind of perpetuating this idea of like it's on women, like they have to do this. And I think that's
Yeah.
something that is really close to my heart, that this menstrual cycle awareness doesn't become a tool of another pressure on women, right? So
Yeah.
what you have to, so you have to go all natural. You cannot use
I know.
hormonal birth
Yeah.
control. You cannot schedule a party during your period. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just against this kind of black and white mentality of like, well, now that we know that these things are powerful, then everyone has to do it, and everyone has to do it the same way. So I don't know how you
Yeah.
feel about that, but I think for me it's
No,
annoying.
it's so interesting because for sure, like, it kind of brought two things up. One is I guess the cyclical living thing. So obviously that's something that, and we'll talk about this in a second, something that I've been trying to do. And I guess I am lucky to a certain extent that I work in an industry where it's a little bit easier than others. Like, I don't have to turn up, especially now that I'm self-employed and I'm working from home at line online. There's a bit more flexibility there for me to be able to do that. But it's still really, really hard. And there's going to be times where I'm phase 4 and phase 1, and I'm like, or when I'm bleeding or just about to, and I'm like, oh, I should be resting. And you're like, but I've got all these deadlines, and
Yeah.
maybe I should have organized that better. And sometimes you have that space to do that and be on top of things. And other times life just gets in the way, and you need to turn up for something. You need to do something. So yeah, sometimes there's that extra pressure that you're not doing it right. And then the
Mm-hmm.
other thing which I thought was really interesting was the in the kind of, I guess, the space that I work in with the training work. So I I take a kind of approach where it's I'm trying to think of a phase. I kind of well, actually, my partner came up with the phase kind of like intuitive training. I think we talked about this before when we were kind of chatting, but it's like it's trying to educate people, women or people who menstruate predominantly because it's more in kind of tune with the kind of cyclical way of how your energy might feel, but actually it's applicable to anyone who kind of exercises or does movement, but about trying to like check in and be like, where am I today? So how am I feeling? How well rested am I? How recovered am I? And then if you do menstruate, where am I in my menstrual cycle? And how do I feel typically during this phase for me?
Mm-hmm.
And using that as a starting point to then pick the level of intensity or the type of training stimulus that you want to do. It's less palatable or less commercial. And I
Yeah.
think, the feedback that I've gotten so far is like, oh, it's a bit confusing, or like, I just kind of tell me what to do. So
Mm-hmm.
trying to find that balance of making it easy for people to kind of adopt and to kind of do, but also not being like, your phase, blah, you should only do X, Y, and Z, being
Yeah.
like, you're probably more suited to this right now. Um, how do you feel? Again, some people might feel good when they're going into like that autumn phase or that phase 4, but other people might feel absolutely awful. So if we're turning around and being like, you you should be feeling bad, and they're like, well, I actually
Yeah.
feel fine.
Yeah. No, I really
How
like that
does
point.
that work?
Yeah. And especially because, you bring up an important point, which is we're not told or we're not taught to trust ourselves. So I think this
Mm.
intuitive aspect is really scary. And I think it is also when it comes to our bodies. Like, can somebody externally please tell me, like, what do I have to do? How am I supposed to feel? So, for example, I'm often asked, like, okay, but what day does the follicular phase end, and when does the ovulatory phase start? And I think the important part, and I think that's really part of the work of menstrual cycle awareness,
Mm.
is learning to trust your own sensation and your own feelings, because I might have a very anxious follicular phase and you might have a wonderfully bubbly follicular phase,
Yeah.
and even for ourselves it can change from month to month. So for me, and I think this also leads to the productivity talk, what I hope to bring to my own audience and in general to this conversation is menstrual cycle awareness can be actually a way to really question perfectionism and question those standards. It shouldn't be a way to reinforce those standards, because at the end of the day, we want to feel freer. We want to feel more supported by our bodies and by the people around us. And I do think sometimes people come up to me saying, oh, but it's so cool that you live in sync with your cycle, but I couldn't do it. I'm like, I definitely don't live in sync with my cycle in the sense that I could never do it perfectly. So I try to prioritize rest when I don't feel well. And it's probable that it's likely that I feel less well in certain phases of my cycle. But I really don't want the message to become, at least for on my own profile, to be like, well, this is the way you have to do it, and this is the way you have to feel.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I like that 100% resonates with the kind of, I guess, my thinking on it as well. And it's trying to find that tone. And I think it's really powerful that you said that it's important that we don't try and fall into the perfectionism of having
Mm,
the perfect cycle. And also, again, everyone's like, oh, I have to have 28 days and have this lovely rise of progesterone. And even me, like sometimes I'd be like, oh, I'm not really getting a rise in the temperature there. I did it wrong. I trained too hard, or I'm too
mm,
stressed. And it's just like, well, no, it's just my body giving me some piece of information that I'm now in a position to read. So what do I do with that information for me later on?
yeah.
So I guess that kind of leads in really nicely into like how are you doing it specifically with the idea of productivity, because I know that's kind of an area that you kind of focus on while still maintaining that distance from the lens of perfectionism. Like, how are you implementing productivity throughout your cycle and trying to live in sync with your cycle, but without doing it kind of as a
Hmm.
checklist.
Yeah. So I think for me, it was kind of really trying to find this personal way it works for me, right? And I think I just kind of make sure to hold on to the basics. So really, when it comes to especially my luteal phase and especially the tail end of my luteal phase, so just before I'm getting my period, to make sure I don't overbook my agenda, actually mostly with
Yeah.
social things, because I have found that in terms of like admin productivity, so in terms of like emails and things like that, and ability to focus, actually my luteal phase is pretty okay. So I, because I'm bothered by people, I prefer being on my own with my computer in my luteal phase. So I, for example, that's a phase where I don't necessarily mind going a whole day, or a few hours without having interactions with other people, but then I
Mm.
have to really manage my energy when it comes to interactions. While, for example, for the more kind of estrogen heavy phases, so kind of the folliculars and the ovulatory phase, I know that it's important that I get to move, that I roll my energy, and that indeed that
Mm.
I get to phone a friend or go for a walk or have a workout, because those are things that, yeah, get my energy going. So for me, I've noticed it's really not necessarily about the tasks. So because I also cannot really choose, because I have a kind of 9 to 6 job, five
Yeah.
days a week. I cannot. I'm not so independent in that sense. Well, I
Mm.
am independent, but I cannot just do whatever I want. But what I have found is what I am the boss of is my energy. So in that
Yeah.
sense, really kind of managing that, and knowing what I need to do to prevent, to preserve it, or to make it kind of roll. Because for example, I noticed that in the follicular phase I tend to get kind of anxious and restless if I don't move enough, or if I don't have kind of enough, external input. And
Yeah.
so if I do, if I fail to do that, I get really restless at work, so I cannot concentrate, which is yeah, it's kind of it's really detrimental, I would say. So that's kind of the basics for me. Almost cycle thinking is like, okay, what do I do with my energy?
Mm.
And then I think the contrast with like how do you escape perfectionism in this process, for me it's really been about taking responsibility. I talk about this often. So taking responsibility of my emotions and of my actions, so not blaming
Mm.
the phase I'm in on one side, and on the second one, like knowing that imperfect people, I love imperfect people, right? All of us love imperfect people around us. So why wouldn't we love ourselves in our imperfect selves?
Yeah.
And that may sound cheesy, right? But sometimes I have this when I think about bodies, for example. Like, I mean, like everybody else, I have thoughts about my own body, and then I think of like women I adore, and whether they're in the star system or not. And then I do realize they definitely don't have perfect bodies, but I find them like so beautiful, so interesting. And why
Yeah.
wouldn't I think of myself that same way? So kind of applying that lens of like, I take responsibility of my actions and emotions, but also kind of giving myself a bit of a break, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah, like it's you said something there that really resonate. Yeah, with the sorry, with the tasks and stuff like that. I thought that was really interesting. Or the energy, like how you feel. Like I definitely notice it from a social side myself as well. Um, and I even noticed that last week I was in like, my spring phase, or kind of like I was coming into my ovulatory phase, and I was in the gym training. And again, I used to work there, so I know a lot of people, and I just was chatting to everyone. Like I just couldn't stop being like, hey, how are you? What's going on? Like tell me everything about your life and stuff. Where other times I'd go in and I'm like, hi, and I'm kind of don't really talk to anyone, and and it's nothing to do with them. It's just I'm more internal. You know what I mean? I'm like,
Mm,
I don't really want to like, I kind of just want to more just go read my book and don't really want to do stuff. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I was so acutely aware of it last week as well, where I was supposed to be doing more of that admin stuff. Like I was supposed to be building out the trackers and do this and do the programs and plan. And, it's quite like Excel based and stuff. And then I was like, I just want to brainstorm all these ideas that I have in my head. So I was just like, right, feck it, basically. I'm going to just give myself. I woke up this morning and I was like almost buzzy. I was like, I'm
mm,
so excited for all the things that I have in my head and I can't stop thinking about it. So I just let myself do it. You know what I mean? And then I was like, okay, I'll go back and kind of do the more mundane stuff
mm,
on other days. But then in some days or some phases of my cycle, I'd be all over doing the more just ticking the boxes, going through, getting everything organized and planned and kind of set up. And it's funny to notice those patterns. And as you said, sometimes we can't choose what we have to do
Yeah.
that week, like especially if you're working, well, sorry, for any job, but specifically in a kind of nine to six where there's demands. But in any job there's going to be external demands and it's very difficult.
For sure. And I do think this connects to what we were talking about before about trusting your own intuition, your own body, and your own
Mm.
feelings. And that's why I think it's so powerful to integrate menstrual cycle awareness because it's really almost a cell phone to your body and
Yeah.
intuition. It's like, okay, how like using this lens to have better connection with oneself and then being able to set the boundaries. So that's another big thing for me. It's like
Mm.
responsibility plus boundaries equal, you know,
Yeah.
a healthier in the sense of like more peaceful menstrual cycle experience because it really helps me to put the foot down when I wouldn't normally feel empowered to. When it
Yeah.
comes to, meeting up with friends or having a conversation with a family member that you don't necessarily want to talk to, I think I really try to manage my energy in the sense that if I know I'm particularly tender in a certain phase, I try to reschedule it to when I am more able. And of course, I've had crappy follicular and ovulatory phases, and I've had
Mm.
amazing luteal and menstrual phases because we're not a perfect algorithm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I think often what people forget because like we all create these infographics right with the four phases and
Yeah.
it's so good and well, but we're also human beings and we are and also we are living through a global pandemic, so I mean
Mm.
we cannot underestimate how the menstrual cycle is not kind of isolated from everything else that happens to us, and whether we are exposed to extreme stress or to extreme joy or to something happening in our life that's gonna influence our cycle experience. So for me, I really have to say that the menstrual cycle practice and this kind of cycle attunement almost, I don't want to even say thinking, is a way to kind of ground back to myself because I find it so overwhelming sometimes to just be in the world and be connected to everything and everyone. And I think
Mm.
the menstrual cycle awareness practice can just kind of help you slow down a bit and reconnect, I would say.
Yeah. I think that's such a lovely idea, like such a lovely way of approaching it. Because it does somewhat remove I guess the structures of it having to be a certain way and
Mm-hmm.
fall within these certain boxes and all this kind of stuff, and it be the same every cycle,
Sure.
where it's just not the case, for most of us anyway. And I think like if for anyone who's listening and you were kind of interested in this kind of area of like productivity or kind of how to kind of approach that in sync with your cycle, what would you what would you tell them? Imagine like you're telling yourself this like, 2 years ago or whatever. Where would you tell them to start?
I think the starting point is really starting to know yourself because it can get so overwhelming to get this kind of information externally. I mean, I
Mm.
always hope to spark interest, but in the end, the practice is personal, right? So, really starting to write down how you feel, how productive you feel, what kind of tasks feel effortless on a given day. And you will start seeing patterns. I mean, I was even skeptical myself at the beginning. I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, phases are similar, but then I started to realize that there were some specific, very specific feelings that were coming up in the same phase over and over again. And I think once you're even aware of that, you have better tools, or you can try to find the tools to get there. Because I was seeing some comments online on Facebook yesterday, I don't know how I even landed there, about people who started questioning their relationships always in the end of their luteal phase,
Yeah.
which I think it's so interesting because this is such a common, it is a common thing because progesterone is like putting really the lens on and a bit like in the meme, it's like kind of
Yeah.
scouting for those details. But that's powerful because you can go so much into, in that focus mode also on your relationship. So for me, starting to record in whatever way works for you, whether that's an app or a diary or a chart, how you've been feeling, I think that's the starting point. And then the second part would be, I think, finding where you need the most support. So from
Mm.
yourself and from others, because it can be again overwhelming to do the food
Of
thinking,
course.
the exercise thinking, the productivity thinking, but like where is the area you struggle with the most, and how can you support yourself there? once once you have this knowledge, right? So I think then the outcome will definitely be more peace and more serenity, which I mean, in my opinion, that's all what we want to strive for, right? So
Yeah. No, and I think the overwhelming point is really, really important because you can kind of get overexcited. Like, I know for me, when I first kind of came across this stuff, I was like, give me everything, like, but then you are a bit like, you try to overhaul, and it's the same. I always think it's quite, um, very similar sort of process to someone who's maybe say changing their eating habits
right.
or their kind of their approach to nutrition where again they're like I'm on a diet and I gotta overhaul everything and they just like I'm gonna start Monday and I'm gonna go on this really strict thing and I'm gonna exercise like 5 times a week and then all of a sudden it's Wednesday and they've already fallen off the bandwagon because they tried
Right.
to do too much at once. So I think that's a lovely kind of similar approach to that where so you say just pick the area that you think you need the most help and then
Yeah.
try and work through that. And if you're struggling, try and get support because there are so many different areas that menstrual cycle awareness falls into. And, I think menstrual cycle awareness, the term came from the wild school and stuff, but it's kind of been absorbed to cover all the different areas. So like, is it the fitness stuff that you're looking for? Is it the nutrition? Is it your self-care? Is it your productivity? Is it how you kind of manage your relationships and your energies and stuff like that? And you can dip into where you think you need it. So yeah,
Yeah.
I love that approach. And I love the memes. Like I lol. I remember when you put, I don't think I shared it at the time when you put that one up, but I was like, oh my God, that's so me. And actually, interestingly enough, just for anyone who is listening or watching this back later on, I used to really struggle with my luteal phase
Mm,
for other reasons. My inner critic was really, really strong, and I struggled to express the, I guess, the zero bullshit approach that kind of can
mm-hmm.
come up in that luteal phase where you are just like, well, that's messy, so we're going to fix that. And actually, I don't actually really agree with that. And I don't, in a lovely way, like I love you, but I don't really want to see you right now and stuff. But there's an element of being comfortable with communicating all of
Mm-hmm.
that in a way that's assertive, but not against aggressive. And there's nothing obviously wrong with being aggressive at certain times. And it's probably something that as women we're socialized not to do,
For
to
sure.
set those boundaries, to say no, to kind of express our frustration or anger about things. And it's for me, I definitely struggled with that element. But once I started learning how to do that and became more comfortable with, I guess, finding my voice, it's a lot easier to prioritize what you need
Mm-hmm.
and kind of, do kind of get pissed off. So, for example, in Ireland, like we're having kind of issues with the kind of partners being let in for maternity access, and you kind of do just get a bit. Obviously, it's infuriating at any time, but especially then, you're just like, come on, and you do kind of get fired up about that stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
it is interesting to notice those trends and how you might adapt and change during certain phases or your relationship with certain phases and how you are, I guess, your relationship with yourself really in
Yeah.
certain phases, which is so powerful.
Totally, and I think, I mean, the luteal phase is definitely one of the misunderstood phases, and
Yeah, for
it's
sure.
also because it makes us, or it lets emerge what we don't expect from women, and actually what we don't want to see, right? So rage, pushing
Mm.
back, honesty, not aligning with what we're being asked to do, a number of things. So that's why I'm saying menstrual cycle awareness is actually a systemic tool that we can use to, kind of really challenge what we are being um, told to do, socialize us, because it's kind of this kind of revolutionary approach, and it's as old as as the earth. It's not very, it's not very new. We are now, we're making it more new. But I think, speaking to the memes as well, I feel like it's kind of funny how that rolled in, because I do love memes myself, and I think at the beginning I just thought, oh, it's just a way to have a good laugh, but actually it's so empowering to see that people share it, that people feel heard and seen, because it's this kind of non-threatening way to say, oh, there's a lot
Yeah.
of things that can go wrong and that go wrong in this system. um, and we are here together, because if 400 people, I mean, I remember there's one post specifically from um, well, one series that I posted that blew up, and what was funny for me is that people were tagging each other's friends, like, and I was like, yeah, because this is like recognition. People are
Mm.
experiencing the same, and sometimes it's very hard to tag one friend under a very serious post, but it's
Yeah.
easier to say, hey, look at this meme. This is like hilarious, and we both experienced this.
Yeah, for sure. And like it's a really it's a really great way of communicating it. Like it gets
Mm-hmm.
it gets a lot. as you said, just in one image, that's so relatable. You know what I mean? Because like again, so the pop culture references and stuff like might be different for different people, but like that's why memes are so bloody funny because
Hmm.
they're you recognize something human in whatever you're seeing in the meme, and you're like, that's so true. You're like, I
Yeah,
do that,
yeah,
or you like you can recognize stuff. So like I love all of those ones where you're like, oh, like, and you see them popping up all the time, and um like the Sex and the City characters, or I think you did one with the
yeah,
Spotify things, and like
yeah,
it's like because you're like, yes,
yeah.
like I get that.
And I think an
Um,
important part about that as well, sorry, just I don't want to make this too
no, go
long,
for
but
it, sir.
I think it's important to say it is we don't want to you know, we don't want to discount our own experiences in memes. So I'm really careful with that because
Yeah,
I think the whole narrative about, oh, women are so cranky during their period or
I
before,
agree.
that's problematic because we are repeating the same
I
things we're
agree.
being socialized in. So I actually have a hard time sometimes. I haven't been posting as much just because, you know, tiredness and stuff, but
I know.
I think it's a hard balance because you don't want to make people feel like they should laugh about themselves because no one takes them seriously. So
Mm,
I feel like the meme should be a way to almost convert that rage into something productive, into a conversation, but not a way
yeah.
to say like, hey, well, this happens to everyone, like period pain, you know, whatever. No.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I such a valid point because I'm the same. Like you see some do see some memes. I actually think I was trying to do a talk back when I worked in the gym. I was trying to find memes, and it was so difficult to find memes about periods that weren't just continuing that stereotype of women being these like hysterical, kind of like cranky yada
Yeah,
yadas, and like,
yeah, yeah.
we're basically like man eaters when this happens, and whatever and stuff. And you're like, well, like,
Mm, yeah.
like that doesn't really sit right with the feminist part of me, and and again, I think it's so important, and it's great to hear you say that because for me, one of the biggest things was shifting my perspective
Mm,
on having periods. Like again, and I've kind of said this in a couple of talks I've done and stuff like that, but like, so I had a twin brother growing up, and I went to a mixed school and all this kind of stuff, and I used to resent it so much. I was like, why do I have to feel this way every month and bleed
yeah.
every month and spend all this money on this and then carry the child? And I used to get so pissed off about it, really, to be honest. I was like, this is so unfair. I was like,
Mm,
why do they just get to have like a steady state testosterone the whole time, and we're here struggling to try and figure out what's going on with the hormones, and it's our responsibility to shut down those hormones and take all these side effects. And it used to really annoy me. But now, and you can see it happening all the time, is it's a more positive lens that people are seeing it being like, actually it's something that we can use to our advantage and that we can live more in sync with. And actually, when we start to tune in with how we're feeling at those different stages, it opens up this whole other sphere of kind of self awareness and kind of self care and self love and self respect, or at least self acceptance or kind of neutrality about that, and exploring what that is for us. And yeah, so I love that you're so conscientious of that in your memes because it is important because we need to, I guess, be careful to not, you hear, I remember, I'm sorry, slight tangent, but I remember when I worked in a corporate firm and we were doing, there was a big, like, women, International Women's Day thing, and they typed in things like boss and then like female CEO and like, kind of this and like, I think, and all this kind of stuff would come up about like bossy women rather
mm-hmm.
than a male boss, which would come up with pictures of like a CEO and like, man in a suit and all this kind of stuff. So I think we need to be so careful that we don't end up contributing to that pink tiles of like of being a girl boss or being a bossy kind of so and so. And I think it's that message is so important.
Definitely. And I think to conclude the tangent, because I
Mm,
understand I'm also following it, is I think an important part that is not being spoken about enough is the privilege part of menstrual cycle awareness. I think
for sure.
it's all good and well to say we can live in sync with our cycle. We can, you know, adjust and ask and do, but there is a level of privilege that you need, you know, to be able to do that. And I do think I feel the responsibility to start saying it more because I think I took it for granted for so long.
Mm,
And then of course it's easy again to kind of start blaming those people that don't do it, or start saying like, why are you not in tune with your cycle? Why are you on the pill? Why are you not
Yeah, yeah.
taking charge of your fertility? Why? And it's like, well, we actually have to address the system that doesn't allow us to do so, that asks us to work even more to get the same pay as a male colleague. We have to address the, kind of the issues with maternity leaves and with retribution. So that's why, I mean, that's my own take on it. I do feel like this menstrual cycle awareness brings up so many issues that we then
Yeah.
have to act on as a society. So it's not only people who bleed, but it's really all of us, I would say.
Yeah, no, and fantastic point. And I guess like it leads us in, or I guess because it always happens. I'm like, we could end up talking for like 2 hours on all these different topics, but I am conscious that, your time, my time, and everyone else's time is what is precious. But I know you did a course as well, the kind of find your flow course, which kind of had an element of kind of learning about productivity and stuff about that. So do you want to talk a little bit about what that course entails, who you did it with, and then kind of where people can find it as well if they're curious about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is a course I launched for the first time with a friend, Ariana, who's a yoga teacher and a health coach in training as well. And indeed, it's called Find Your Flow, and it's in the link on my profile. You can easily find it. And it's a 4-week course. It's self-paced now. And really, the idea was to speak to these 4 phases in a bit of kind of through this lens, right? So, how can we deconstruct the idea of productivity with the menstrual cycle? Meaning, how can you find your own flow, really,
Mm,
rather than just adhering to what you're being told to do? And so I curated the goal setting and productivity modules because I think sometimes we don't really talk about how the cycle can also help us dream about our dreams and concretize our
yeah.
dreams, which is something that I find interesting. And then Ariana, my colleague and friend, she kind of put together 4 different yoga flows for each phase, and then also recipes tailored to the phase. So it was a really nice experience. We had a really nice cohort the first 2 times we launched it. So now it's a self-paced course, so you can find it in my profile as well.
Yeah, super. No, and I love that, and I think the fact that you're saying that you can learn to channel your energy of your menstrual cycle into dreaming dreams and planning that and seeing what sticks and kind of seeing that whole creative cycle come through, and it's a really interesting experience. And then again, I just think it's very useful for people to have some indication of what might suit them movement wise and food wise during different phases of the cycle. So yeah, it's
Definitely.
cool. I remember reading it and I was like, that's slick. I like the description.
Nice.
But look, thank you so much for having me on. I know I'm going to be on yours to kind of flip the camera and kind of talk about all things kind of training and
Yay.
nutrition and everything. But no, it was great, really, really interesting, and yeah, it was fab to have you on. So thanks so
Yeah.
much.
Thanks a lot for having me. It was a really nice chat.
No problem.
Have
Yeah,
a nice
super. I'll
Friday then.
see. Yeah, you too. Bye. Thanks so much.